Hello everybody, my name is Mark DeSalvo. I'm the elected town moderator here in North Andover. Delighted that you can join us. We have a special edition for special town meeting of On the Warrant. I'm joined by the chair of our Board of Selectmen, Phil DeCollegiero, and our erstwhile town manager, Andrew Mailer. Welcome both of you.
Thank you, Mark.
As is our tradition, we want to talk about the process of town meeting, what town meeting is all about, and what happens to be, as titled, On the Warrant. And I thought we'd dive in right away, except for this coda, and to tell you that town meeting is Tuesday, the 30th of January, at the high school in the field house. And we encourage you all to come. It commences at 7 o'clock. We anticipate a very, very large turnout. So I suggest that you get here quite early, and we'll get into how we're trying to make the process a little bit more efficient as well. But the first question goes to you, Phil. Why are we having a town meeting in January?
To shake it up.
I think you've succeeded then.
Yeah, well, so actually this was prompted by approximately 700 residents signing a petition that had circulated throughout town asking that the Board of Selectmen call a town meeting so that we could discuss a proposed host community agreement for a potential facility at 1600 Osgood Landing, or 1600 Osgood Street, commonly known as Osgood Landing. And so once we received those signatures and they were certified, and we only required 200 signatures, we were compelled to schedule a meeting, and so we scheduled it on January 30th, I think out of the hope to give as many residents as possible notice. So, and part of that notice is us being here today. So.
Appreciate that. So what exactly is on the warrant? How many articles are there, and who puts it there?
Well, as Phil indicated, the town meeting was called by the selectmen, or was compelled. The selectmen were compelled to call the town meeting under state statute.
So that's a state law.
So that's
obligation.
a state law. And once that happens, once a group of citizens acquires 200 signatures or more on any topic, it doesn't matter if the topic has merit to the selectmen or not. The selectmen are compelled to hold a special town meeting within a specific time frame, and the selectmen were mindful of how that time frame is a fairly aggressive time frame, quite frankly. Minimums and maximums to the time frame to when it would best serve the public. And with that, then residents are allowed with only 100 additional signatures to add any other items to the warrant that they would like town meeting to discuss. And of course, the Board of Selectmen and other boards can add items to a warrant. Okay. So in this case, one article compelled the calling of the town meeting. It turns out to be Article 6. And of the 6 items that are on the warrant, there are five other articles. So Article 1 and 2 are citizen petitions filed by the same group. The first is
by the same group.
The same group of citizens.
Group 1 and 2 were filed by the same group, not the group that initially filed for the petition to actually move the town meeting. Okay.
So 6 articles.
Yep.
3 are citizen petitions. Articles 1 and 2 on the warrant were filed by the same group.
Got it.
And Article 6 was filed by a different group, the group that originally compelled the selectmen to call a town meeting.
So what are Articles 1 and 2?
Articles 1 and 2 are petitions requesting that the town amend our bylaw to ban any type of recreational marijuana commercial use in the town of North Andover. That would include no storefronts, no manufacturing, no innovative research. Basically the 5, well, in its entirety, all 5 categories covered under the new law that voters had passed back in November 2016. And Article 2 is, correct me if I'm mixing things up, it is the zoning component. Yep. So Article 1 is really interesting. Article 1 requires a majority vote.
Because it's a bylaw.
Correct.
It is a general bylaw.
Yep.
Article 2 is a zoning bylaw. So Article 2, in order for that to pass, would require 2/3 of a vote. So 2/3 of the attendees of town meeting would need to vote in the affirmative in that case.
So an independent group of citizens made a petition of the selectmen. This was placed on the agenda because the meeting had already been called, and we're going to discuss, in effect, the banning of all marijuana-oriented, commercial-oriented retail, cultivation, and other distribution, if you will, at that time.
So of the 6 articles, all 6 have to do with marijuana. However,
it's our cannabis agenda.
It's a cannabis agenda. But the 6 articles come from 4 different sources. So the first 2 were submitted by a group of citizens actually several months ago with the request that they either be placed on our general meeting, that our regular town meeting that we would be scheduled to have in May, or if a special town meeting was called for whatever reason, it be placed on that agenda, and that is what happened. Subsequently, what happened. Article 3, a little bit different. It was part of a discussion that the Board of Selectmen has been having over the course of the past 3.5 months. Since the beginning of October, we began discussing what we as a town, as selectmen, wanted to encourage the town to pursue at town meeting when it came to general bylaws managing or overseeing
Well, you'll
marijuana.
forgive me. At the last town meeting, we had a moratorium
Yes.
that was placed on the community for a period of, I believe, 18 months around the general prohibition of marijuana, commercial interest in marijuana. Is that what the selectmen you're referring to relative to the general bylaw that you're proposing?
So the moratorium applied to zoning and general. The concern was that we were going to have to go through a great deal of work to review and assess the zoning so that we complied with law on whether or not we wanted to allow certain types of recreational marijuana. And so the moratorium helped buy time for us to have a thorough review of our zoning bylaw. So to keep...
Go ahead.
No, so the general bylaw is one that we should have been discussing, whether or not we wanted to place as a municipality any type of prohibition. It would be the town meeting that would place the prohibition, but the Board of Selectmen reviewed the 5 different categories that one could get a license under the recreational law. The board discussed the pros and cons of allowing certain categories. Again, one of the categories would have allowed retail storefront sales. The board discussed whether or not we wanted to present our own bylaw, either outright prohibiting anything having to do with recreational marijuana, or whether we wanted to create exceptions in that we'd allow certain operators under certain categories of licenses.
So, forgive me, so independent of the proponents and the opponents of cultivation here in town, the Board of Selectmen were walking down a road relative to putting together what I consider you would reflect as a responsible bylaw
Yes.
for the community.
So the board began this discussion in October on what has come to be Article 3. Articles 1 and 2 were submitted to us, I think, the first week in November. So
Okay.
all of these discussions were happening among citizens, among the Board of Selectmen, and also among the Planning Board, which is the source of Articles 3 and 4. As
4 and 5.
Yes, excuse me. So 1 and 2 are citizens. 3 is the Board of Selectmen. 4 and 5 are the planning boards.
So let me ask the town manager, what's different between Article 1 and Article 3?
Yeah, the difference is, and then I want to expand a little bit on the, without getting technical, a little bit about that sort of timeline and process we might be helpful.
And that's why we're having this, because it's a
so-
little bit of an interesting circumstance.
Yeah, let me start there a little bit. So the moratorium, at the time, communities were advised to place moratoriums as items on their annual town meeting agendas by the Attorney General's office as a way of making sure that, as Phil identified, would have time to sort of contemplate and think through this rather complex topic. At the same time, although the referendum question, this was a state ballot question, right, did not pass in North Andover but did pass statewide, right? And as a function of that, the world was changing around the sort of commercial, sometimes called adult use, sometimes called recreational. So one, for those folks at home, if you hear adult use, commercial, recreational,
Same thing.
it's the same thing. It's we like to talk about it as non-medical. It's just easier to sort of categorize it because everybody knows what the medical piece is. And so we were advised, as many communities were, and there were dozens upon dozens, I think certainly north of 70 communities that placed on their annual town meeting warrants this prohibition. And it was specifically a zoning prohibition at the time because almost all the land use matters are handled through zoning. And so that was passed. It was recommended by the Board of Selectmen. It was passed by town meeting. I think it was probably a unanimous vote. Certainly there was no debate about it, some discussion about how long it should last. And then from that, we received an additional advisory after the May town meeting from the Attorney General's office. It said, listen, we're not sure quite how this is all going to work out as the process, and a new committee was formed by the state called the Cannabis Control Commission. We're not sure how this is going to work out. So we're going to advise you that in addition to having your planning board review the zoning and come up with a zoning associated with cannabis in your community, we think that if you have an interest to limit or prohibit any kind of cannabis use that falls into that non-medical commercial adult use category, of which there are 5 different categories, 5 different items. If you have an interest to do that, you should put some belts and suspenders around the conversation. So in addition to having a zoning bylaw, you should propose a general bylaw that works hand in glove with that zoning bylaw. And that's what motivated the selectmen to have this conversation about a general bylaw, Article 3 on this warrant, regarding cannabis, commercial cannabis. And so because this community, this goes to the question of why a special town meeting and why not a referendum, probably a future question, is because this community did not pass the referendum. A majority of the community members did not, the statewide referendum. Then as it relates to our form of government and the conditions applied under that referendum and its interpretation, the control of what happens in terms of the use of cannabis can be in the form of a general bylaw approved by a town meeting. It does not need a town-wide sort of referendum question. So the selectmen engaged in that kind of conversation, and I don't want to step on what Phil's comments were, a couple of meetings, 3 anyway, about what the board's interest was, and that ultimately led to Article 3, which is the recommendation by the Board of Selectmen in Article 3 of the town meeting warrant that the retail storefront be prohibited, not limited, but outright prohibited, and that a category known as craft cultivation, won't try to explain what that is. In essence, almost like renting space in a bigger facility to grow your own marijuana.
Tenant farming. If you
Tenant farming, thank you. Indoor tenant farming of cannabis. That also not be allowed in the community. And so the selectmen's bylaw, proposed general bylaw, would be to prohibit, outright prohibit, the retail or that craft cultivation.
So there seems a small difference between Article 1 and Article 3, the general bylaws.
There are 5 categories under recreational use or commercial recreational use. The Selectmen's article, Article 3, prohibits or would prohibit if passed by town meeting 3 of those 5 categories and allow 2 of them.
Which 2?
One would allow for innovation, using marijuana for research, and the other would allow for the cultivation, commercial cultivation outside of the craft.
Right. And Article 1
prohibit would all 5.
So there's obviously some conflict between those 2. What happens if they both pass?
Well, it's important to remember that in Article 3's case, we don't say, we say what we are prohibiting, but through omission we are allowing the other 2 categories. So Article 3, everything Article 3 does is accomplished by Article 1, but Article 1 takes the next step and would frankly prohibit research, which our board debated, discussed, and 4 out of the 5 members felt that that was not something we wanted to prohibit.
So as a matter of course, in terms of a practitioner viewpoint for our viewers here, if you happen to be in favor of the Osgood Landing project, you would, it would be allowable under Article 3, the Selectmen's article,
yes,
and not allowed under Article 1, the citizen petitioner's article.
That's correct.
Okay. So I would anticipate as moderator it will be an enjoyable circumstance if they both pass. I don't suspect that that will be the case.
You said it would be an enjoyable?
Enjoyable, certainly, entertainment-wise, if nothing more.
I'm glad that that's entertaining for you.
Thank you very much. I'm just a government dork, I guess. I don't know.
We'll see if the 3,000 other people there agree with you.
Thank you very much. But notwithstanding, I suspect, and this is why it's important to come to the meeting, be in your seats by 7 o'clock early. The parking lot only holds 400 cars. There will be parking available and shuttle buses at both the middle school, Atkinson School Complex, with pickup at the back door of the middle school, and also pickup at the back door of the town hall in the parking lot associated with the senior center. So we're trying to make it efficient for people to be able to come, and encourage you to please get into your seats early, because the very first vote will essentially set the tenor for the rest of the agenda of the meeting, I would suspect.
Just taking to the question that was asked, which I assume was more than rhetorical. If the first item passes, then it really won't matter if the third item passes. in the sense that one doesn't override the other by sequence, right?
Yep.
It's somewhat similar to the second article. If the first article passes and for some reason the second doesn't, and I say for some reason because it would seem like they're linked,
And
right?
the second article is the zoning map in
Zoning,
effect?
the prohibition to cannabis and not a general bylaw, but a zoning bylaw. But if you have a general bylaw that prohibits anything, then the fact that you do or don't have zoning becomes moot. Because if you can't get in the front door, then it doesn't matter if you can get to the planning board and ask how to sort
In the back
of
door.
build the rest of the house, right? So again, I think it's this is not the petitioner's perspective, but I think there would be a fair representation that it's sort of a belts and suspenders. And so 1 and 2 are related in that way. But a ban would ban marijuana, right? Commercial cultivation. That's what commercial marijuana in the community. That's what a ban does. Item 3 is banning it or prohibiting it for the retail and the cult cultivation and allowing for the rest that is allowed under the commercial.
So we're being very deliberate here today not to discuss the merits of one versus another or to advocate for any one over another despite whatever personal opinions members of this little panel have. But to talk about process and what the consequences are of the vote. I always say that every vote counts at town meeting, and even more so, every vote counts significantly at this coming town meeting. So I think we've dealt generally with Articles 1 and 3 and the association with 2. Let's go to Articles 4 and 5, and they were presented by the Planning Board.
Yes.
One of the reasons why the Planning Board is not represented here is because they've not yet made a position or specific recommendation as of the taping of this panel, and their final recommendation, although they've done a significant amount of crafting, will be made. When will that be made, Mr. Town Manager?
They're going to actually take their vote on the 23rd. So
Okay.
they had will hold 3 public hearings. 2 have already been held. They'll hold the 3rd public hearing, and as I understand it, they are scheduled to take a vote regarding the bylaw or the bylaw as amended, depending on how the process works, at their posted public meeting, their standard meeting on the 23rd of January.
Okay.
And so in their normal venue, I assume it'll be in the Selectmen's meeting room, and there'll be a posted agenda and all that process. And my expectation is that they will complete the public hearing process, close the public hearing, deliberate at some level, and ultimately take a vote as to what gets moved forward to town meeting.
So what are the proposed Articles 4 and 5?
Yeah. So, sort of jumping off of what happened at town meeting in this conversation about what happens after a moratorium. Well, logically, the moratorium under state statute, you can't have permanent moratoriums, especially as it relates to things like zoning. You put moratoriums in place as a temporary stopgap until you can think of a replacement article. That's exactly what the planning board did. So back in August, only a couple of months after the annual town meeting concluded with passing the moratorium, they began the work to look at what would replace the zoning article, which at the time was only addressing medical marijuana, and to craft a bylaw which represented what they thought was in the community's interest regarding both medical and commercial and taking on.
So in the normal course of events, it was anticipated that the planning board would do this work in any circumstance.
Yes.
Because of the moratorium, with the likelihood that it would be presented at the annual town
Yes.
meeting in May. But for the petition to have a special town meeting, it may or may not have been accelerated. Was it accelerated? Does anybody know?
I think that would have to be a comment that the planning board makes. I know that they've been working on it again since August, and for the most part, they seemed to have been on the verge of starting the public hearing process. When it became a possibility to put this on the special meeting on the 30th, they did schedule 1 week after the other 3 public hearings. I believe state law only requires 1. Our practice as a town has always been 3. So they've had they've had 2 public hearings. They're going to have their 3rd.
So they will have fulfilled by town meeting the normal and consistent practice of
Yes.
the planning board at that time.
And truly going over and above what's legally required.
Okay.
I would guess that they probably wouldn't have scheduled them 1 week after the other just because
Yeah.
town hall's fun, but I don't know that they wanted to spend every Tuesday in January at town hall.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, right? So It'd be, I think the term rush would be inappropriate, but it doesn't mean that that would have been the exact schedule the planning board would have identified. I think they began the process anticipating that the bylaw would happen in May. With the need to open a special town meeting warrant, it also became more logical. Having attended the meeting where they voted when to hold the public hearings, I think that would be one they expressed, boy, we thought this was going to be May, and at the same time recognized the opportunity to complete the process in the traditional manner that they have held.
So there was a prudence to the fact that we would have at minimum on the special town meeting 3 articles around the cannabis question. Then there was the general notion that both the selectmen and the planning board would move forward with the work that they'd already completed. Or were in the process
and in the case of the
completing.
selectmen, the bylaw, Article 3,
Yeah.
we really had completed that.
Yeah.
There wasn't
Okay.
anything additional that we had to do when this meeting was scheduled. It just made sense, given that we have it, to put it on the next meeting. Again, we have a moratorium anyways, and it went through our next regular town meeting, but we had it completed. I did speak with the planning board. I would think it was the middle of December, and there was a question, perhaps even the beginning of December. I spoke at their full meeting, and one of the members did specifically address, well, if there were a special town meeting and selectmen did present their bylaw, there was that interest in they wanting to make sure all marijuana bylaws ideally were discussed at the same meeting.
So what is 4 and 5? What are the planning board presenting, just generally?
Yeah, I'd have to leave it general because it's a pretty detailed bylaw. So the planning board is...
I think in the warrant, it's something
It
like
is in the warrant.
16 pages
long.
of legalese and description and
Yes.
and the like.
and the like.
So
it
please
is-
read it.
Yeah, I would recommend to everybody that it is certainly available to the public, the website, the warrant, both electronically and other means. So it is a comprehensive marijuana bylaw that replaces what was originally placed in as a moratorium that gets into all of the details about the various uses of or applications of commercial adult use, recreational, and medical marijuana, and provides everything from the special permitting requirements and the planning board's role. I mean that of course we're getting ahead of ourselves, but if that bylaw was to pass, and depending on what happened at town meeting, the planning board is re-engaged with any applicant, so it reserves the rights, as you would expect of the planning board, to as a special permit granting authority to go with special permitting process. So it outlines that in really very specific detail, the expectations and requirements of any applicant, and the framework for which the planning board would agree to any approval for any special permit moving forward. It's extensive. That's Article 4. Almost any time that you add a new district, in this case an overlay district, you need a map to reflect what the district is. So 5 is simply the map. So 4 says, here's what we want to do, and here's a description of the parcel or parcels we want to do it on. The map within the zoning world allows us to have a very specific representation of what the parcel identified and the language means. So Article 5 is a map. Do you accept the map that refers to the bylaw that
4.
precedes it?
So let me pose a question that's been asked of me at cocktail parties and Christmas parties and grocery shopping, and that was, I thought the interest about cultivation was defeated at the last town meeting, and that you couldn't come back to the town meeting for 2 years. And that's clearly not the case. I know the answer. I might ask your comment on what the answer is.
So, and I'll do the best I can because I don't attend cocktail parties, but
well, you'd be invited
my
to
wife won't
mine
send me to the
anytime.
supermarket. But I certainly know that it's a question out there that's to come up. There are 2 standards that have been identified as town council that would allow this kind of bylaw, because it was a bylaw through citizen petition proposed for something similar, very, very similar back in May, and that passed by majority, but did not reach the 2/3 requirement that zoning bylaws are allowed. And so there is statutory references that indicate that zoning bylaws cannot come back for a period of 2 years, and that's what people refer to. But there are 2 standards by which they can come back. One, that the planning board supports the article, right? In the first case, the planning board back in May did not support that article. So the fact that the planning board would be the one sponsoring this article and making an assumption on the 23rd, since they're sponsoring the article, again, I'm only making the assumption, hasn't happened yet, that they vote in favorable action for that article. That's one of the sort of two check boxes to revisit something in 2 years.
Exactly
And different,
correct.
that the article must be different in character. The board has already voted, I believe two weeks ago, at their posted meeting. They have voted that they believe this bylaw represents a bylaw which is different in character than the citizen petition bylaw that was filed and appeared at the last May
I
town
think the
meeting.
language is actually substantially different.
I know that town council has been involved in working with the planning board as to what would be considered different in character, and
So there is, just for the benefit of the populace, there is no question that the articles, assuming the planning board chooses to support it, their own article, that they are properly before the meeting and they can be voted on by all attendees at town meeting. So we've just got a few minutes left. Article 6, what's that all about, Phil?
So Article 6 it's funny in the sense that it is a question before voters about whether or not they would like to set certain terms for us as a community to enter a host community agreement in the event that the zoning changes happen and a potential indoor cultivation site can be set up at Osgood Landing. It's an unnecessary article in the sense that the Board of Selectmen already has the authority to pass that. Certainly the voters have the opportunity, they could pass it, they could reject it. Ultimately, it's not binding, and so it can't actually formally direct or compel the Board of Selectmen to act in certain ways. The terms that are laid out, and again, this is the article that prompted town meeting. This is what voters signed up for to compel the board to schedule this in the first place.
The aforementioned 700 plus or whatever it was.
Yes, over 700. I think at minimum there were over 600 signatures certified. We only needed 200
Okay.
to have something like this happen where we have a special. And so I really don't know how this discussion will go. This was something similar was placed on the agenda at last year's town meeting. It was pulled, and it was pulled because it had not, the zoning changes needed to even pursue a host community agreement had failed.
So therefore it was nullified.
Yes, and it wouldn't have, again, it wasn't necessary either way, but it certainly wasn't necessary last year. In this case, if the petitioners were to move forward, we would, I suppose, have a discussion about what the community should be fighting for. I think that there should be no doubt among the residents of our town, among the voters of this community, that the Board of Selectmen, in any circumstance, would always fight for the best possible deal for a host community agreement with any entity for any purpose if they were going to come here.
So has there been any authorization to move forward on crafting that?
Yes, so we did have, I should say, the town manager was having discussions. We discussed it back in December. And discussions with the applicant, the individual, the property owner interested in setting up the facility at 1600 Osgood. That was suspended, and then the Board of Selectmen had a discussion at our last meeting, the second week of January, and we voted to resume discussions with the applicant, just so we could get a better idea of what they were willing to provide, and certainly it helps the negotiations that they understand what our expectations are. And so I believe the town manager, and I'll let you answer that.
I think the most important part of the Selectmen's action on January 8th that asked that I engage the property owners, developer, however referring to the folks involved at Osgood Landing, was that there's a logical expectation, whether it's under Article 6 or someone else, someone's going to say, we read what the group says, but what should we really expect? And I think the board's interest, and they have to be applauded for it, is about transparency. Instead of trying to speculate, the goal now is to know enough about what that business deal would look like, to be able to publicly communicate it in settings prior to town meeting, but certainly at town meeting. So we remove, the debate becomes a community debate about what you want for the community, but this discussion or challenging what may or could be in any business deal hopefully will be largely resolved going into town meeting. So if the question comes up, then that can be answered by either the board or I, and that item set aside so that the body can decide without speculating what really is being discussed, influencing that outcome.
So, just secret between us, do you care to tell us about what's going on in those discussions, and have you come to any conclusions? No one's watching, it's all right.
Yeah, that's why I don't go to dinner parties. So I would expect that I will communicate to the board and to the public, because again, I believe that this should be one of those items that is, I think all items should be transparent, but it's one of those items we need to get ahead of what other people are communicating at these dinner parties. Is that I would expect that I'm going to communicate to the board sort of a rough outline, very specific enough for people to know what's really likely to happen prior to town meeting. And then, so we would be, 95, 98% there around those kinds of topics prior to town meeting, and certainly be able to answer those questions in a fairly solid way at town meeting.
Always good to inform the meeting. So if I'll allow me to ask myself a question.
Right.
And that is, how is town meeting going to be different, this special town meeting? It's going to be different essentially in three ways. Number one, it's going to be in a different place. It's going to be at the field house. Not the most comfortable of circumstances. We're going to do everything that we can to replicate the level of information, technology, ability to be able to see and hear what's going on in the field house, but it is going to be a less comfortable environment. There will be seats on the basketball court floor, if you will, and come early if you want the more comfortable seats. Other than that, you'll be relegated to the bleachers on either side and perhaps at the furthest end. Again, parking is very, very limited, so come early and carpool and enjoy a little social environment before we commence the meeting at 7 o'clock. There will be two other things that are going to be different. We're trying something. My partner in town meeting is the town clerk, and she has been, for these two gentlemen, an extraordinary partner, and as you know, a truly committed person to North Andover. We're going to be trying essentially a speed check-in process, an express check-in process, whereby folks with called poll pads, really iPads in their hands, you come in, bring your license, they'll be able to swipe right away. It will check on a local database in that poll pad whether you are a registered voter, and no information is kept, no information is stored in any way. It's not transmitted to any other party. It's simply a black or white determination as to whether you happen to be in the registered voter database. If not, you'll be referred to the Board of Registrar of Voters. And if you don't wish to, you don't trust the system for whatever, you don't wish to swipe your license, you don't have a license, you can go to the normal check-in process where a poll worker, a check-in worker, will take your name, actually type it into the poll pad, and then allow you to move through the process. At the time that you're checked in, we're going to be giving people a band, a wristband, and then you'll be able to proceed to the venue, which is the field house again. And only those people with a wristband will then be given a voter card. If you've not been to town meeting, that's the process in which you hold up your card and your vote, other than a voice vote, is counted by double counters in each section. We anticipate that the field house will be large enough. If it isn't, we will have overflow space in the auditorium. That will not be opened unless we're truly, truly tight and full inside the field house. So that's the difference at town meeting this year. Gentlemen, any questions for me or any other comments that you'd like to make before we wrap?
I think it's a great idea as far as being able to sign people in that way. I mean, just because this is, for a lot of people, normally our town meetings are several hundred people, and we aren't
Although
having
last
them.
year we had 1,100 people at the annual
Touché.
town meeting.
Yep, over 1,000. For me, it's exciting because I think it will help facilitate a really good experience for people who aren't normally attending town meeting. Hopefully it ropes them in and they continue participating.
Good point.
I would say that as someone who's attended town meetings both in an official capacity and as a resident here and in other places, and I'm one of these people who fall victim to this. I'm a late arriver. And I'm not a late arriver to our town meetings, but by style, I'm a little bit of a late arriver.
You're just in time kind of a guy.
I'm a late arriver. I would say that if there's one town meeting you want to be here for at the very beginning, this is it, right? Because it's a short agenda. All the topics are the same. Often in our annual town meetings, the first couple of articles are, I hate to talk about them as softballs, but they're sort of, we get through the formality. You typically introduce someone. In this particular case, if you want your vote to be counted, regardless of what you're doing, your very first vote is as important as, is in this case, more important than probably the sixth vote, right? Those 5 votes are very, very important. And so that first vote's just as important. So make the commitment, recognize it's going to be really difficult logistically, as much as we do, getting in this parking lot, getting to a place, checking in, and expecting that that's going to happen when you pull into the parking lot at 5 or 7 means more like a 7:25. It's going to take you that while, right? So I encourage everybody to come, and more the merrier. And I encourage you to find a way to make sure you can arrive early enough to get in and get in your seat for what will be a really interesting conversation, but we'll start at minute 1.
Well, town meeting I always characterize as a vital community conversation, and there's just no question about how vital this conversation will be. It's a one-issue town meeting. There'll be a broad agreement or disagreement. We'll get right to the point, so the substantive article will come up immediately. No matter your opinion, we encourage you to come because your opinion counts. Again, town meeting is Tuesday, 30th of January. If it's a snow date, we'll have a follow-on date for Wednesday. If there's a multiple day blizzard, then we'll go to Thursday. We're all praying and hoping that we'll get our business done in a timely manner on Tuesday prior to 7 o'clock. The doors will open in the check-in process, and the comfortable seats are going to be available at 5:30 p.m. We invite you to come. And I thank you for coming to help inform the citizens of North Andover. You each do a wonderful job at that, and I'm deeply appreciative of it.
Likewise. Thank you, Mark, for creating the forum.
Oh, it's my delight. Thanks, Phil.
Great.
Thank you, Andrew.
See you in a couple months.